In September 1983, a Soviet military officer named Stanislav Petrov was sitting alone in a bunker outside Moscow when a system alarm triggered. His screens indicated that 5 American nuclear missiles were currently in flight, headed directly for the Soviet Union. The Soviet military operated on a strict protocol called launch on warning. If the early detection system registered an incoming strike, the Soviet Union would immediately fire its own weapons back. The doctrine left no room to wait for visual confirmation or double-check the data. Under this automated logic, a false alarm carried absolute stakes. If the military followed the protocol for a glitch, the retaliatory strike would provoke a genuine counterattack. Within a half an hour, the civilization that took 10,000 years to build would be reduced to radioactive ash. Petrov looked at the flashing screens and reviewed the incoming data. Instead of passing the alert up the chain of command to authorize the counterstrike, he picked up the phone and reported a system malfunction. He was right. A rare alignment of sunlight on high-altitude clouds had confused the satellite sensors. Humanity survived that night strictly because one man chose his own intuition over the demands of a protocol he suspected was flawed. From 1947 to 1991, the United States and the Soviet Union locked themselves in a massive ideological standoff. Both sides possessed enough nuclear firepower to wipe out the other, meaning any direct military conflict would result in mutually assured destruction. This absolute demand for security required physical enforcement. In 1961, the East German government began dividing Berlin with concrete and barbed wire to stop its citizens from fleeing to the West. The ideological divide of the Cold War became a physical prison wall. The rules surrounding that wall often superseded basic human preservation. When an 18-year-old named Peter Fechter was shot trying to climb over, he fell back onto the eastern side. West Berlin police were legally barred from crossing the border to help him. The East German guards simply watched. He bled to death in public, trapped by the political logic of the border. The paranoia permeated domestic life as well. During the McCarthy era in the United States, lawmakers launched aggressive investigations into citizens suspected of communist sympathies. People were blacklisted and their careers ruined, subverting the very civil liberties and democratic ideals the country claimed to be defending. By 1983, Soviet leader Yuri Andropov became convinced the U.S. was preparing a surprise nuclear first strike. Soviet intelligence watched so closely for an attack that when NATO ran a military exercise called Able Archer, the Soviets actually mistook the simulation for the real thing and placed their nuclear-armed aircraft on unprecedented alert. In their attempt to engineer flawless defense mechanisms, both superpowers built a system so hypersensitive that the pursuit of security pushed them to the brink of accidental destruction. A machine error almost launched a nuclear exchange in 1983. 6 years later, a simple human error brought down the Iron Curtain. On November 9, 1989, an East German spokesman named Günter Schabowski was handed a note outlining new travel regulations. He had not been briefed on the details. When a reporter on live television asked when the new rules allowing travel to the West would take effect, Schabowski shuffled his papers, looked confused, and declared the change was active immediately. The regulations were actually supposed to take effect the following day, but the broadcast triggered a massive surge. Thousands of East Germans immediately began to march toward the border checkpoints. The guards standing duty had no clear orders and no updated protocols. Overwhelmed by the crowds and unwilling to open fire on their own citizens, the guards simply opened the gates. East and West Berliners poured through, embraced, and climbed the concrete, tearing the barrier apart with pickaxes and hammers. The most heavily fortified physical border of the 20th century was not dismantled by military force or high-level diplomacy. It fell because a spokesman misread his briefing notes, and ordinary border guards abandoned their training. The collapse of the Berlin Wall rapidly accelerated the end of the Cold War. In December 1991, Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev resigned, and the Soviet Union formally dissolved into 15 independent nations. The decades of standoff left deep fractures. The Soviet system collapsed after proving unable to provide basic living standards for its people while maintaining a vast surveillance and prison state. The United States spent the same period frequently using the Cold War framework to suppress domestic civil rights and political dissent. This map shows the current state of global nuclear proliferation. While the Cold War ended, the tools of that era remain operational. Over 12,500 nuclear warheads are currently in service across 9 nations, and the relationship between major powers is still governed by the doctrine of mutually assured destruction. The collapse of the Soviet state left volatile borders that directly feed into modern conflicts, including the war in Ukraine. At the same time, the rise of China as a military and economic power has created a structural dynamic that mirrors the past. 2 powerful nations with incompatible visions for the global order, facing off across escalating flashpoints. Stanislav Petrov died in 2017 in a small apartment outside Moscow, living mostly on a modest pension. He is one of a handful of people, many whose names are still buried in classified records, who stood inside the machinery of war and quietly prevented it from firing. These moments suggest that our survival through the Cold War was not a guaranteed outcome of wise statecraft or reliable automation. It was preserved, time and again, by individual human beings who prioritized life over the rigid demands of ideology. We cannot afford to keep building apocalyptic systems that require a solitary, rule-breaking hero to prevent the end of the world.